All right, and we are live. Mr. Patriarch, how are you?
I'm doing good, man. Been a busy week. Starting a new business and bought a truck today or buying a truck today. So a lot of stuff going on here, but doing great, man. Blessed, as they
Fantastic.
say.
Yeah, so the business thing, I know it's not our subject for today, but it's interesting how many of us are we're at least striving in the business arena. So,
Yeah, no, I mean, like we're doing okay financially. Like I don't have tons of debt or anything. I got fairly good income. But my wife's a stay-at-home mom. We got our third kid on the way, and I would like to buy a house someday. So my philosophy on that is the 50 cent approach. Get rich or die trying. So I figured
yeah.
I could do with a bit more risk reward in my life. So I'm starting a seasonal business up here in the great state of Alaska. So hopefully it should work
Yes.
out pretty good. And fortunately for our case, like attainable housing is still possible, like without being a millionaire. So
So that
you
was going to
can,
be my question. I was going to dig into that because I had thought
yeah,
for whatever reason that in Alaska there's been no affordable housing since the 80s was just what I had assumed.
yeah. It's definitely gone up since like everything else, but I mean, you could still find 3, 4 bedroom houses um, with land here for between 3 to 400,000. So, and you can even find some under occasionally, which aren't total dumps for like 3 bedroom places for sub 300. I've seen those. They're rarer, but they do come up.
Yeah, so that actually sounds relatively reasonable. Kind of a greater Midwest price set.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it is more expensive up here, generally speaking, um, just because of the remoteness and the cost of shipping goods. Everything's got to get sent up from Seattle, Tacoma, basically, and it goes to the port of Anchorage, and then it gets trucked out from there, by and large. But the housing, one of the things that does help out with the housing costs is we do have low population density, and even in Anchorage, um, the population there is sort of stagnated, sort of flatlined, and you're actually seeing a little bit of people leaving. And the only spot in the state that's seeing any growth, mostly from internal migration, is the Matanuska Valley. So that's about an hour north of Anchorage, and there that this area is growing, but generally speaking, the population trend for Alaska overall is actually downward. So we don't have like you know a gazillion immigrants flooding into our great state, driving up housing costs. So that's something to be grateful for.
Yeah. So who lives in Alaska? I mean, are these people now that have been there for generations, or was there a big movement in the interwar period and the post-war period? Like, what makes up Alaska?
Yeah. So if you look at this map, you see Anchorage down there. Anchorage accounts for about half of the state's population, and the state's population is about, last time I checked, it's less than 3/4 million. I think it's about three. I think there's about 740,000 people total in the state, and half of those live in Anchorage. So Anchorage is our big city, but even then, it's not like some sprawling metropolis. We're talking about 350,000 people in the whole area, and Anchorage is sort of emblematic of what your typical Alaskan is in some regards. So you have predominantly, I guess, a few types of people who live here. So first, you have the a lot of economic transplants. So at some point or another, somebody was decided it'd be good to move to Alaska for economic opportunity. So in Anchorage, for example, you have a lot of Southeast Asians, Vietnamese, some Thai people. There's a lot of Filipinos and some Pacific Islanders, and they're mostly coming here for economic opportunity. There's also a large contingent of white Alaskans who also fall into this category. So they have like some job with ConocoPhillips or, Crowley trucking or something. And then they end up here. And of course, you have the government workers and military. So the military is the second route by which people tend to come here. So that's kind of how my family ended up here. So Alaska has, even though it doesn't have a lot of people, it's got a lot of military installations. So you have the Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson outside of Anchorage, which has got, it's quite a big base. So it's a joint Army and Air Force base. And then further up near Fairbanks, you have Eielson Air Force Base, Fort Wainwright Army Base in Fairbanks. And then you got actually a Space Force base up at Clear. So that's where they have, there's a town called Clear where they have I guess technically now it's a Space Force installation, but that's where CERN is located. So if you're familiar with that or, are interested in some of the conspiracy stuff, that's where they have an installation for that up here. And they've had some other installations as well. So military is sort of how people get up here a lot. And for whatever reason, the land appeals to the male spirit in a certain way. And then a lot of them just decide either they don't want to leave or they'd like to ride out there. So once their time with the military is over, then they come back. So two of my great grandfathers came up here during World War II. So one of them was from South Dakota, and then he actually was involved in the repelling of the Japanese from the Aleutian Islands. So if you look at this map here,
which is a very overlooked portion, of those conflicts.
So and basically in order, kind of like what Ukraine's been doing with the Kursk offensive to get Russian troops away from the main line of conflict over in the Donbass region. The Japanese actually invaded the Aleutian Islands of Alaska. So further out in the island chain, it's not even on the map because the island chain's so long, but there's an island called Attu, which was inhabited by Alaska natives. And the Japanese invaded it. And then in response, the United States military responded by, kicking them out. And a lot of them, some of them died. And like a lot of the guys who weren't killed in the initial combat died in a bonsai charge. So there's actually a bonsai charge on Alaskan soil, which is kind of cool. But in any case, that's sort of the history there. And long story short, after the Second World War, my great grandfather, he talked my great grandma into moving up here after the basically things weren't going so good on the farm, and so they sold everything, and then he came up here and he was an electrician. So, and my family's been here ever since then. It's the same thing with my other great grandfather. He got deployed up here by the Army Air Corps and then the U.S. Air Force. And as soon as he could, he, decided to finish out his deployment here, I think, or his officer contract. And then, he just lived out the rest of his days as a hunting guide, fisher dude. So he'd fly people out in his airplanes, and I have other family who got up in different ways, but that's the majority of them comes from that World War II thing. My other great grandfather, I don't think he came up for a military deployment. He joined the Merchant Marines in 1946. So he was just aged out of being involved in World War II. But for whatever reason, I think he ended up here, and then he was trying to talk my great grandma into moving here, and then he's like, "No, trust me, it's cool." But then she didn't want to move to any heathen territory. So after Alaska became a state in 1959, he was finally able to convince her to move. So,
oh, I totally forgot about that too. So that what was it technically at that point? A protectorate?
It was just a territory. So it was kind of like
Okay.
what the Western United States was before they became states. So it was an owned
Thing
territory
too.
of the United States. It's kind of like what
Guam, Puerto Rico.
Guam is. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's so the people who live here are U.S. citizens, but it doesn't have votes in the Electoral College. It's got a territorial governor appointed by the federal government. Um, but yeah, so that was Alaska for the longest time. But what made Alaska viable economically as a state, and was sort of the big thing that helped get its statehood, was the discovery of oil up on the north slope of Prudhoe Bay, and they found oil in other places as well. So there's oil down, I believe, near the Kenai Peninsula, or or down in Seward. But the majority of the oil, by a long ways right now, is drilled up in Prudhoe Bay. So you see it up there in the right up on the Arctic coast. And they built a pipeline in the 1970s. I believe it's the longest pipeline in the United States, that goes all the way from Prudhoe Bay down to the port of Valdez, which is you can see sort of down on the coast there. So kind of across the mountain range from Anchorage, there's the port of Valdez, and then from there, crude oil is shipped out for export. And yeah, that's what sort of sealed the deal on Alaskan statehood. So, but yeah, and then going back to the other groups, I guess there's two other groups of people of size worth considering. One is, of course, Alaskan Natives. So if you look at this map, basically everything outside of Anchorage, the Kenai Peninsula, Valdez, Juneau, and Fairbanks, the majority of those towns are majority Alaskan Native. So they have these communities that they've been in for forever. And Alaska has the largest proportion of Native Americans proportionally for the population of any state in the United States, by actually quite a ways. There are also, it's unique in that Alaska never had a reservation system. So to a greater extent than what you would find with Native Americans down south, they were able to, by and large, sort of stay on the land that they were more or less always on. Of course, there was some difficulties maybe down in the Matanuska Valley, but generally speaking, they are where the white man found them, so to speak. And in order and for they do have local governance for a lot of their communities. So some of these places are like dry towns, dry villages, so you can't buy and sell alcohol there, just as an example. And they also, in the mid 20th century, developed these native corporations. So instead of having a reservation system with sort of territorial sovereignty, there is kind of that, but they decided to incorporate. So they have villages which are part of the native corporation. And then the Arctic Slope Regional Corporation is heavily involved in the oil and drilling sector. So, and you also have other native corporations. So like another major one is called Doyon, which is based out of Fairbanks. And they're involved in a lot of construction projects and stuff. So they do have their fingers in a lot of pies as far as like business goes. And they do generate their own revenue through these businesses. And there's other things as well, like having the Alaska Native regional hospitals and stuff, which are for natives only, and provided for, I guess, partially through their membership. I think they do receive federal funding, so it is kind of a handout, but they do also, I believe, shell out some of their own money. And I don't think it all comes from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but I could be wrong about that. And then I guess the last group is the people who are trying to hide out for some reason. So, like an illegal immigrant who like really doesn't want to get found might move up here. I know of a case where that's happened. Or just, shit goes south wherever they're at in the United States, and then in order to get the heat off of them, they come up here. So that's the last group. So the four nations.
Hey, this is amazing. You are answering a ton of my questions before I'm even asking it, because the reservation system in particular, I was curious exactly how that worked here in the past century, if they ever had one. So a couple of questions on that. Are the tribal nations up in Alaska, are they more or less the same as what you find in CONUS, in that there are different nations that operate in closeness to one another, or is it more independent and less national between the different tribal nations, or how does that operate?
Sorry, you cut out there for a second. Can you repeat your question again?
Sure. So the tribal nations, let me walk you back. The different people groups in Alaska, the First Nations that were up there, are they individual nations? Like down in the lower 48, you have Sioux, you have Cherokee. Are there multiple tribal nations?
Oh yeah.
Or are they okay?
Yes. Yeah. No. There's actually quite a few, and yeah, definitely. So in the interior of Alaska, so that goes from kind of the Mat-Su Valley up through Fairbanks. Those are the Athabascans. And then on the north slope, you have the Yupik or the Eskimos. In Southeast Alaska, you have the Tlingit and the Haida. And I think there's the Shamiga. I'm sorry. Sorry for all my minority Indian Alaska Native listeners, but I think it's Tsungmina. It's some sort of weird spelling, but they're a smaller tribe in the Southeast. And then you have another one related to the Yupik. I think they're called the Utik. And then in the Aleutian Islands, you have the Aleut. And all of these tribes are quite a bit different. So, of course, you have the Eskimos, or the Inuit or Inupiaq in the north. And then they live a very different lifestyle from, say, the Aleuts. Because the Aleuts, it's sort of the climate is much more kind of like what you'd find in like northern Scotland, or like the Faroe Islands of like, I guess it's technically owned by Denmark. So grassy, windswept, rainy, that's sort of the Aleutian Islands. But then if you go, and then the Athabascans in sort of the interior of Alaska, they chase the caribou herds a lot, and they'll have like a fish camp and they move around. So they're more nomadic. The Aleut were fairly settled just because they got all their sustenance from the sea. And at least that far south down the Aleutian chains, the ocean doesn't freeze. So they don't have to worry about that. And then in the southeast of Alaska.
That's a wild statement, a wild phrase. The ocean doesn't freeze.
Yeah. No, the ocean doesn't freeze down in the Aleutian Islands. And then in southeast of Alaska, with the Tlingit and the Haida, you could say they're sort of the most developed culture in some ways, because they had, relative to some of the other tribes, a greater abundance of resources. The climate's a little more mild. You have tons of deer, tons of fishing year round. So they actually had settled communities and were non-nomadic for the most part. So they'd have like a big longhouse, like they'd build totem poles, a lot of pretty cool and interesting artifacts, and sort of a more settled, dare I say, civilized people in that regard. Just again because of the abundance of resources, and and there's some other tribes as well, but I think there's something like 10 distinct languages for the different groups in Alaska. So, that's that.
Awesome. So I have two paths that I want to go down, and I got to keep one in the back of my mind. And I'll start out with this because you are Orthodox, correct?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. When did the Russians get in there? Because my understanding is some of the first Christian churches in what would become the United States were the Russian Orthodox churches in Alaska. Is that a fair understanding? And when did they come about?
Yeah. So the Russian American company was had a royal charter from the Tsar. I believe I might have the dates off, but it was in the 1700s. I want to say the mid 1700s, and they had an early expedition out there prior to that, just discovering the existence of this landmass. Oh, wow. It's over here. So basically, after Siberia had been explored and was beginning to be settled, basically they just kept going, and they're like, all right, we've hit the ocean. Let's see what's over on the other side. And it turned out to be Alaska, and it wasn't that far away. So, and just as an anecdote for that, there are two islands. You
can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll get to that just now. So there's an anecdote for what I'm talking about. There's two islands called Little Diomede and Big Diomede Island. And they are, one of them, Little Diomede Island, is an inhabited island in between the Bering Strait of Alaska and Russia. And Big Diomede Island used to be inhabited. Now it's uninhabited. And they're only 3 miles apart. So you literally can see Russia from your house if you're in Big Diomede, or if you're on the Diomede Islands. So they are quite close. And I think from like Point Hope to Russia it's not that far either. Like, I think it's like maybe 50 miles or something. So we're talking about not a very far distance at all. So the ocean, it does separate, Russia from Alaska, which makes a difference, obviously. But it's also not that far away either. And back to the Russian history in Alaska. Yes, the Russian American company got a charter from the Tsar to start this predominantly fur trading company. So they were very interested in acquiring sea otter pelts. And they actually almost hunted them to extinction, which, I mean, we got tons of sea otters now, but it was kind of like with the bison, they just went whole hog and, captured too many of them. So they were after sea otter pelts. And they colonized Alaska. They checked out. They did a lot of interior and coastal exploration. And where you had the most interaction with Russians and Alaska natives was in what is now Kodiak, Sitka, the Aleutian Islands, and sort of the southeast Alaska. South central, southeast, and the Aleutian Islands. So there we go. And they Christianized the natives, and apparently it was actually fairly easy to do for the most part, because the patron saint of North America was he was brought over. So you had Saint Innocent, who was an Orthodox bishop who was sent here. And then you had Saint Herman, who is the patron saint of North America and evangelized a lot of the natives. So the priests functioned as sort of an intermediary between the natives, advocated on their behalf when dealing with the Russian American company and the local governance structures. And they were able to sort of take some of the heat off of the natives. So one of the things that happened is like they were enslaved to get beaver pelts, some of them. And the priests are like, hey guys, look, I mean, it's not cool. You can just pay them or go find them yourself. So they're able to sort of, things like that earned a lot of goodwill between the natives and the priesthood. And it of course varies from, different tribes and whatever, but from what I understand, the indigenous beliefs of, I believe specifically the Aleut, were actually fairly easy to it was fairly easy to talk to them about Christianity because they had a lot of similar ideas about God and religion that you wouldn't find in like some other societies. So I don't know if you've listened to Blood Satellite Dimes' show, but he reviewed an interesting book which was
I'm
talking
not familiar
about
with that at all.
Yeah, but he reviewed an interesting book about indigenous beliefs in different societies and how sometimes it's very primitive, and you have like animism and like ideas of where there's not even like they don't even think about like God as like a single entity in like the same way we would.
Right.
And some cultures, they apparently sort of evolved from that into ancestor worship. And you have some like very bizarre theological ideas from some of these tribes. But a lot of the Alaska Natives actually did have an understanding of a higher deity, sort of creator god. Mm-hmm. And of course, you have elements of animism and stuff, but it was actually apparently fairly easy to sell Christianity to these people because they just sort of came in. They're like, hey, you guys got a lot, a lot of the groundwork's already been laid. We're just here to sort of like fill in the details and stuff for the natives. So they were more easily Christianized than some other groups, like some of the, more obscure tribes in Africa or in the Indian subcontinent, for example. And a lot of them are still Orthodox to this day. So,
okay. So, well, that's going to lead into some questions. But I will say, one, I'm going to need the info on the podcast you're talking about. But then two, you see in different groups that have different pantheons and are more of a polytheist. Oftentimes there is a through line that you can find in them, in that there is an ultimate creator or the most powerful God, the Lord of Spirits, so to speak. It's so, to my way of thinking, it seems like all of these to some degree echo that great true religion that was ultimately fulfilled in Christ, but began in creation, in relationship. And then we see these weird echoes that are sometimes radically distant, and then sometimes eerily close to the Christian understanding of who God is and what he was accomplishing.
Yeah. I think that's right. And in the case of the Alaska Natives, again, from my very lay, non-expert understanding, their religion was closer in a number of aspects, and also their morality wasn't too crazily different. So they weren't. Yeah. So it was.
They weren't necessarily going Comanche on each other.
No, they weren't. They weren't going Comanche on each other. I mean, of course there was fighting, but they weren't as warlike as like the Comanche, or as bloodthirsty as like the Aztecs or anything. Sure. So you didn't have to. They didn't have to be reconstructed, so to speak.
The Orthodox churches in Alaska, and I don't want to dig too far into it, but I'm curious. Is there a through line of Russian Orthodox churches, or did eventually it go completely OCA, Orthodox Church in America? How does that operate now in Alaska?
Yeah, so there's a number of jurisdictions up here. Most of them are OCA. And what ended up happening is, of course, it was originally the Russian Orthodox Church when it was part of the Russian Empire, territory owned by the Russian Empire. But when it was sold, and it still was sort of Russian Orthodox, even after the land was sold to the United States in 1868. However, basically, with communism and the ensuing problems that created for jurisdictions, you had kind of like this branch. You had this, these churches out in Alaska, which were in communion with the old Russian Orthodox Church, now kind of cut off. So eventually, they became they joined what later would be the OCA, Orthodox Church of America. There are a couple of exceptions to this. So, for example, in the 1980s, you had a lot of the, I guess what were called the evangelical Orthodox. So these were people who were initially evangelical Christians who, got into church history and got into Orthodoxy. And a lot of them converted and joined the Antiochian Archdiocese of America. And they built a church in the 1980s in Eagle River, which is about kind of halfway between Anchorage and the Matsu Valley. And then they built another chapel out here in like 2010, I want to say. And then they built another jurisdiction. Sorry, I'm stuttering my words. But yeah, so most of them are OCA. There's another OCA church in the Matsu Valley, but there's two Antiochian churches, most OCA, and then there's a Greek church in Anchorage, I believe, which is kind of the odd man out with the two Antiochian churches. And I believe there's a Russian Orthodox church as well, but I'm not sure. That the great majority of churches in Alaska are OCA.
Gotcha. Now, speaking of evangelicals, did the low churches, did the Protestants ever make a big move up into Alaska in the past century?
Oh, yeah.
Or is it okay?
Big time. Yeah. Big time. That's by and large what you'll mostly find up here in the big urban centers, right? So, like I said, in a lot of these
bases.
Yeah. So what you'll see a lot in the Matanuska Valley or in Anchorage is you'll see a lot of evangelical sort of non-denom churches. I attended one of those for a number of years in my youth. And that, in my experience, that's what most Christians in the Matsu Valley and in Anchorage are. They're typically that. You do have some Presbyterians, some Lutheran churches, but they're not as they mainline Protestantism isn't nearly as strong as evangelicalism is up here specifically. You definitely have way more evangelical practitioners. There are also Catholics. However, they are, I think so Alaska's again, this has to do with population density and just the way everything's kind of spread out. But there are more Catholic practitioners in Alaska than Orthodox ones. However, the amount of Orthodox churches and Catholic churches in the state is about at parity. So there are about as many Orthodox churches as there are Catholic churches. In fact, there might even be more Orthodox churches than Catholic churches from the last time I checked the numbers. But the thing to keep in mind about that is you'll have like an Orthodox church out in somewhere like Point Hope, which has got like, hardly any people at all. And then you'll have one Catholic church in Anchorage, which, has like hundreds of people or 1,000 people, right? So it's a little more difficult to sort of gauge. So even though, you do have a lot of Orthodox, mostly Alaska natives, but you're getting a lot of people converting. So the parish that I attend is pretty much, I think there's probably 150 people who are members there, and basically all of them either converted or their parents did.
Okay.
And yeah, so that's a big thing. And then out in the villages, you have the traditional religion out there is actually Orthodoxy, and you have a lot of people who are Orthodox. There's some Catholic stuff out there in the villages as well. But then you have, some like Greeks in Anchorage. There's also a lot of Russians and Ukrainians up here.
Okay.
And a lot of them join the Orthodox Church. However, a lot of them are also Protestant, which you might not think, but in the Matsu Valley, for example, they have two Slavic Protestant churches. So one of them is it's a Baptist church that does services in Russian, and there's another one. There's another church which is sort of an evangelical / Pentecostal church, which does the same thing. It's got services in Russian. So
I'm not entirely sure how it happened in the greater Midwest. So you will find pockets of Russian Baptist, and then sometimes there might even be Ukrainian Baptist. There was a Serbian Nazarene church that I knew of growing up. It's like I don't know where y'all came from, but here we are.
Yeah, and I think it from my understanding with a lot of these people, they or their parents grew up in Russia, and they remember the communist era, right? And Russia wasn't really Christianized for a while, and they encounter these Western missionaries who are Baptist or evangelical, and then that's what sort of gets them back in through the door. So it's a new Baptist being a Baptist or an evangelical is a new thing in Russia, right? Like it's not the ancient faith of the Rus or anything, but at the time, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, to be crass, it's the zeal of the convert, and nobody. It's been my experience that nobody hates the Orthodox Church like ethnic Russians or American men that are married to Slavs that left the church.
Yeah. So that is an issue, but a lot of them do seem to have been, raised in no particular religion during the Soviet times, and then they convert. So I actually know an Armenian Mormon up here, and that was basically what happened. So she was in Armenia. She was, Soviet society, and then communism falls, and then these Mormon missionaries get in there, and they're like, hey, and then she's like, I mean, sounds good to me, I guess. Like, so, and then she immigrates, marries an American, blah blah blah. So
There we go.
but
All right.
but yeah.
So changing direction a little bit, digging into Alaska a bit more. How did Alaska even even exist? I guess what I'm trying to say is farming, agriculture, is it a purely protein state? Is it all fishing? Is it all hunting? Is there a growing season out there? What were the logistics of Alaska that enabled the different tribal nations and then enabled the settlers in the past century?
Right. So the initial draw, like I said, was the fur trade with the otters from Russia. And then after it was sold to the United States, it was kind of a land speculation deal. So they're like, we don't really know what's here, but I mean, Russia wants to give us a good deal on it. I mean, there might be something. There's probably gold up there. And then you had a gold rush. You know, of course,
Look how big it is. There's got to be something good up there.
That's basically it. Yeah. So they're like,
Yeah.
there's got to be something good up there. So they bought it, and then there was a gold rush. So the Yukon gold rush, a lot of people would come, which was in Canada, Yukon Territory and stuff, but a lot of people would come up through Alaska, and Alaska was involved in that. And then there was also a lot of mining and done in Alaska. There was a gold rush up in Fairbanks, and so that was initially what got people in the door was gold and, mineral, precious metals speculation and stuff. There was also a very large copper mine called Kennecott Mine. I think the world's largest zinc mine is actually in Alaska. So it's called Red Dog Mine, and it's up in the north. And there's actually a ton of natural resources up here. So in terms of just total value of export, you have oil. Fisheries is huge. So something like 40% of all seafood caught in the United States is caught in Alaska. So, that gives you an idea of how many fish there are up here. Crabs and whatnot. So fishing is huge in terms of raw cash value. Forestry is also pretty big, particularly in the southeast. You have precious metals, a lot of precious metals mining in the southeast, and then other things like zinc. And as far as sustenance goes, first one which I've already mentioned is fishing. Fishing was and remains a very big industry in Alaska, and it's the way by which native populations sustain themselves to a large extent. So if you were a coastal native, or even lived in the interior and were on the rivers, which most of them were, a lot of these interior tribes like the Athabascans were on the Tanana River or Yukon River or something. And they would, get salmon and stuff that way. So that was actually how they sustained themselves by and large. So hunting, gathering. So they would go hunt specifically the caribou, and then later they'd have the domesticated reindeer. And then but
As
lot,
in they would be
probably
farming and then harvesting the reindeer. Is that sort of what you mean by domesticated?
Yeah.
Okay.
So reindeer, I don't know if you're familiar, but reindeer are basically a kind of like a domesticated version of a caribou. And I think they brought them over from Norway or something, but there's also speculation but there's problems with the Food and Drug Administration in getting reindeer classified as a livestock animal, just because of how the subsidies and everything pans out and makes it expensive relative to beef to like raise reindeer. But if reindeer, as far as Uncle Sam were concerned, were treated the same way that like cows were, then in the interior of Alaska and like on the Seward Peninsula, you could farm a guerrillian reindeer because it's perfect land for them. They are pretty docile. about as docile as a cow is if you've ever been around reindeer. And
I have not.
you don't need, yeah, and you don't need to worry about watering them in the winter, which is one of the problems that you have with cattle. I mean, in fact, they prefer to have snow, and you just free range them over this, hundreds or thousands of square miles of land, and provided you're able to get your meat to market, you can make a good living that way. But aside from the fish and the reindeer, reindeer is much less of a big deal than fish. But it would be cool if Alaska had a major was able to develop a major reindeer industry. But I digress. Now, if you look at the map here, you see the valley around Fairbanks, how it's kind of flat. There is farming that happens up there. The University of Alaska Fairbanks has developed a barley, which is custom tailored to sort of grow during the short growing season that we have up here. So people actually do farm barley, and you can go to the store and buy Alaskan grown barley, and they'll make pancakes out of it, or like they'll have muffin mix made with Alaskan barley, and it's actually quite good. And if you look to the map further south in the Susitna River Valley, north of Anchorage, they actually have a lot of farming up here. So there's a town called Palmer, if you zoom in there, which was initially started as a farming colony during the FDR administration. So it's kind of built more like a traditional sort of Midwestern town. And you actually do have quite a bit of agricultural produce, which is grown out there. Specifically things like potatoes, carrots, these enormous cabbages, zucchini, things like that. So there is farming that happens, but the places where you're able to do it at scale, which it's financially viable to do, is kind of constrained to the Matanuska Valley, and then also the area around Fairbanks in the Tanana River Valley. However, due to the short growing season, that does cause some problems, but there are people who make it commercially viable to do farming up here.
Yeah, so that's actually, I was going to dig in a bit on that, because I'm just thinking, man, even a small combine, if you're talking 115,000 to just for the tractor, I don't even know what the shipping would be, because I can't imagine there's too much manufacturing that's close. My goodness, farming just sounds like quite the endeavor out in Alaska. What is the growing season? 2 or 3 months, or?
So basically, and it depends where you are, right? So if you're down in the Matsu Valley, Matanuska-Susitna Valley, where probably most of the farming happens, the snow's gone typically by early May, and then they'll be getting the ground already, and you'll have buds and stuff in May. They'll probably start appearing sort of at the end of April, but then from May to about the end of August is how long you got to work with. So that's May to June, July, August. It's about 3 months.
That's pretty reasonable. That's not terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, so it is shorter. Like, I mean, you could probably get an extra month or two out of it further south, but it's not like super duper short. It is short, but it's long enough and the soil's good enough that you're able to make some money doing it. So you don't have these huge like industrial sized farms, but you do have a lot of smaller farms out in the Matsu Valley. One of my family members is involved in farming, and they came up here during the FDR era and were homesteaded the land, and got a farm out of it. So yeah, and it's still in operation. He's kind of retiring, and some of he's got a family coming in that's going to slowly take ownership over it, and he's working out a deal there. But yeah, there is farming that goes on up here, but not enough not enough for the local market.
Okay,
You see what I
perfect.
mean? So
Yeah. So then, is there enough fishing that goes on that could Alaska sustain itself without
if we
shipping?
kept the fish ourselves, 100%, just because of
Okay.
the sheer volume of fish that's kept here. Now it wouldn't be a very particularly varied diet, but it'd keep you alive. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's just so much fish which is caught here, and most of it is marketed for export to the lower 48 or other places like the Japanese like a lot of the stuff we catch, for example. Um, but yeah, there's yeah, I mean, if just off fishing alone, you could live off that. But I mean, people like other things too. They like apples and oranges and bread and stuff that you can't grow up here very well. Like, I mean, there's no way you can grow citrus up here. There are some apple trees which you can grow, but in the volume that would be enough to meet the local market, I'm not sure if you could.
Sure.
If they really expanded out the barley fields um, up north, and they have been expanding, like that, the business involved in barley cultivation has grown, and they actually have their own flour mill now.
Yeah.
So they are distributing throughout the state, which is pretty cool. I like it. And
Do you see? Sorry. Go ahead.
oh, go ahead. That was all I was going to say. But
Okay.
yeah, long story short, a lot of the stuff that gets up here comes from Seattle. So
Okay.
that was and remains the main way in which we get most of our stuff.
Do you see, because of the difficulty in doing these things at scale up in Alaska outside of the barley, do you guys have basically a thriving farmers market economy, a lot of small growers, things of that nature?
Um, you do see a bit of that, like hobby
Okay.
farming. My
Yeah.
grandma's really into that.
Okay.
um, but yeah, I mean, there are some farmers markets and stuff, and that's just a world though that I'm not super familiar with.
Yeah.
So I do know it exists. I know friend of mine who goes to my church. He gets his milk sourced locally from I think it's either local. I don't know if it's goat milk or cow milk, but
That's what I was going to
he's
ask, if it was cattle or not.
yeah. I want to say it's cow milk. I don't think it's goat milk. Yeah, I'm just going back through my brain here, but yeah,
Does
there are
anybody raise sheep out there?
yeah, I've seen sheep. So like at the Alaska State Fair, you got
Yeah.
4-H entrance and like sheep and stuff. But as like a serious livestock animal, I'm not so sure.
Fair
Um,
enough.
yeah, one of the interesting things though is that this was when I was in high school, but or no, I was in college. Sorry, but there's this area outside of. So there's a town called Manly, and it's got a annual population year-round residents of about 30, and and you drive out to the river, the road stops, and you go across on a footbridge, and then you're in the town of Manly. And once you're outside of Manly, though, it is one of the few remaining places in the United States that still has land grants for homesteading. So the federal government will
What?
literally give you land to homestead. It's just land. They're like, yeah, we don't know what to do with this. And what ended up happening in this particular area is that some guy got land for homesteading, and he was raising Tibetan yaks out there.
Yeah.
So, and if you think about it, it's probably a good animal to have that would do pretty well up here. But yeah, you do have like really niche, artisanal,
Yeah.
boutique livestock agricultural operations up here, like the guy who's homesteading with Tibetan yaks with his land given to them by the federal government. So
well, and that's a little bit of how I operate out where I'm at. I don't do any row cropping or anything, but I raise a lot of sheep. I raise some pork because I have to, but uh, sheep's the big one that I actually enjoy raising. And you hit the nail on the head when you were talking about beef earlier. The water issue in the winter is going to be a big one. Cattle want liquid water.
right.
So, yeah, absolutely.
Yep. But reindeer, hey man, they're happy with snow. So.
Oh man, that's awesome. So a couple final questions as we start putting a bow on this. One is, does all of Alaska turn into a tourist trap in the summer? Is there a season where you guys are like, oh crap, here it comes?
So yes, there's a town. It's kind of a town. It's called Princess. It's got a lodge in it. It's called Princess Lodge, and it's got like stores and restaurants and stuff. And literally the whole town shuts down after tourist season, and like the traffic lights get turned off. There's nothing there, and then the boards come off the windows. Everything opens up again, and then they get a guerrillion tourists. So tourism is a big part of the Alaskan economy. So like I said, Princess Lodge is a big one. If you look down at the map in the town of Homer, down on the Seward Peninsula in south central Alaska, they get a ton of people checking that place out as well. So Homer, yeah, I mean, it's the same sort of or similar sort of thing on the Homer Spit, which is like this 3-mile long jutting piece of land that just goes out in the middle of the ocean. They got a bunch of seasonal businesses which are open and cater to tourists, both local and national/international. The cruise ships are a big thing in Southeast Alaska, so a lot of cruise ships will come up through there and go to those little towns like Sitka or Ketchikan. So yeah, Talkeetna also gets a lot of tourists. It's very different in the summertime compared to the wintertime, but unlike somewhere like Princess Lodge or something, Talkeetna is a real place. Yes, its lifeblood is tourism, but it is also kind of a proper community. Like you do have people who live there, quite a few people who live there year round. You do have a lot of businesses which operate year round. They have a major brewery out there, Talkeetna Brewing Company, and the Denali Brewing Company. And they make and distribute beer all throughout the state. With their manufacturing base there. And I imagine they probably get a lot of their barley from those guys up in your Fairbanks. So yeah, tourism, it's big in Alaska. You have a lot of Korean tourists, wanting to see the Northern Lights and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a lot of Asians who come and visit Alaska.
Yeah, okay.
And recently I was up in Fairbanks, and they have an international ice art challenge. So you have teams, and they had like flags with all the teams and stuff. And you had like a team from the Philippines, Australia, Germany, Japan, and all these guys are just like carving ice on the Fairbanks fairgrounds, like, making dragons and shit with with ice and chainsaws.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
And to my surprise, yeah, when I was up there in Fairbanks, there was a lot of people who wanted to experience Alaska in the wintertime. And I ran into a lot of them at the hotel, and they just they love it.
So there are parts of Alaska that are probably way more cosmopolitan than you would expect.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Anchorage for sure. The Matsu Valley to a certain extent. Yep. Matsu Valley it's kind of like, MAGA country out here, very white, red American.
Yeah, we didn't even dig into that. Okay.
Yeah, and Fairbanks is also kind of like that. Anchorage is more like the city government is full of shit libs, but the population, but the population actually isn't that crazy. and they're pretty pragmatic and stuff. So it's not nearly as bad as somewhere like Los Angeles or anything. It's not your bog standard, blue controlled city top to bottom. Yeah. And I know in the 2016 election, Anchorage voted for Donald Trump. 2020, Biden won by a slim margin. I'm told there were shenanigans involved. I can either confirm or deny. And in 2024, I'm actually curious here. Let me see.
Okay.
Google. Here we go. So Alaska 2024 election results. There we go. All right. 2024 presidential election in Alaska. Sorry, we're getting some on the fly research here. And yeah, I was curious about this because I was trying to see if the trend reversed itself in this most recent election from 2020 or yeah. All right, but let me see. So Alaska Republican primary. Predictions precinct. Yeah, so Donald Trump comfortably won the 2024 election. I'm trying to see by district. Sorry, this is bad TV.
Oh no, dead air.
But yeah, dead air. But it looks like, just looking at this map, this election map, it looks like Anchorage actually did vote for Donald Trump in 2024 in the congressional district. So, but yeah, I'll have to double check it.
There's sort of this thing. I come back a lot to Dave the Distributist, and he talks about art and this idea that good art is necessarily right art. Not because it's intentionally so, but just naturally there's this extension that flows out of an awareness of what's true, what's good, what's beautiful. And I think that also plays out in a very material way when you get into places like Alaska. Even you get outside of DC and in places like Virginia, or well, frankly, it's any map. Once you get outside of the city and you get into a place where your boots are on the ground and you have to logistically be aware of different issues, it ties you to the land, and that necessarily evidences itself in at the very least a more libertarian understanding, if not a more steward-friendly, right-leaning identity.
Yeah, no, that's true, and I think more so than some other places, I think the nature of the geography kind of dictates that to a certain level in Alaska. It is, I mean, like, again, you do have like down in Juneau, right? It's just a bunch of government workers. So of course it's going to be sort of the way it is. But like specifically in Anchorage, there's a lot of people who are keenly aware that, just over there is wilderness. And it's kind of hard to disconnect from that. Like, I mean, it's, and it's a hard thing to explain, but if you do spend a lot of time sort of outdoors here, which a lot of people do, I mean, there is a certain sort of reality which is unavoidable by just sort of virtue of living here and spending time a lot outside. And I think that does sort of impress upon the people a certain type of pragmatism, which is maybe not as present in places like Los Angeles.
Yeah. Well, so, it's to be crass, it's not as prevalent in the places that can support the delusion.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. All right. Well, very last one for you. We are gonna put a bow on it and bring this to an end. You are a worldly wise man. You've spent some time in different areas. You have come back to Alaska. So tell me now, what makes Alaska the greatest state in the union? or at the very least, what what is what do you appreciate most about it?
Yeah. For me, it's quite simple. It's just, I mean, this is my home. So, I mean, you do have a lot of transplants up here, like I said, but I mean, at this point, like whatever it is about Alaska that people like, I mean, my family's got it. So my 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 great grandparents, they liked it. Um, my grandparents like it. I still have one half of my grandparents lives up here. The other half of them moved down to California, mostly for family reasons, because my great grandma's quite old, as you can imagine. And my parents are here, my brother's here, and I just like it. There's a lot of things growing up here which I just took for granted, which I, later realized is not the norm in most of the country. There is like quite a bit of, I guess, freedom that you have up here. I mean, it's a very libertarian state in kind of like the good sense of the word, in that like, there is an attitude that if the state is like overweening and overbearing, like people just reflexively don't like that here, which I think is a good impulse to have. And the land and the need for self-reliance in a lot of places. Like, I mean, my parents, they spend about half the week every week. They just left today at a place which is basically like a compound. It's developed into a compound on an island on a lake in the interior of Alaska. And all that was built by my great grandfather and my grandpa. And it's been sort of maintained and sort of updated and now taken over by my mom and dad. But that appeals to a certain type of person, which is not everybody. And there is a very real sense that you're not like hemmed in here, that you do have a lot of space, that you can just go off and get lost in the woods if you want. And comparatively speaking, very good gun laws. I mean, I think they're the most lax gun laws in the United States. It's the
Really?
least.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you don't need a permit. You don't need a concealed carry permit. You got open carry stuff here. And, which I think open carry is kind of dumb just for like, pragmatic reasons, but you can do it. And it's also the least taxed state in the United States.
Okay.
So low tax, lots of guns. And in terms of economic opportunity, even though things are more expensive here, your earning potential, generally speaking, is a lot higher. There's also the permanent fund dividend, which is nice, which, if you're unaware, basically, and this is interesting because it's one of the few like victories in libertarian history. But in the 1970s, there was a Libertarian Party state senator who apparently was instrumental in setting up the permanent fund dividend. And what that is basically, he's like, the idea is that the state of the oil, which is vast and not really owned by any like one person, can claim oil ownership. And he's like, from a property rights perspective, it's the only person who can lay claim to the oil is the people of Alaska. So the people of Alaska should benefit from the oil sales, not just the state government. So
what?
Long story short, every year, the permanent fund dividend based off the interest and proceeds, we're talking billions of dollars, they pay out annually to every Alaskan resident. So, for example, this year, every child in the state of Alaska, based off, once you establish residency, they receive, for this year, it's going to be $1,700. So, I mean, if you have a family of 5,
Now,
now you're going to,
is it a tax credit, or is this like
it's
no
cash.
joke?
It's
How
no
did
joke
he
cash.
pull that off?
So that's what I'm telling you. So again, the oil is, it's up there, right? And then it gets drilled and whatnot, and then there's these deals with BP, ConocoPhillips, etc., Shell, and you got this big giant fund worth billions of dollars.
Wow.
And then every year the interest on that, which is based, they have their formula for it based off like how much earnings or whatever gets paid out to all Alaskan residents. So the way it's sort of set up is that you are a shareholder in the state and their prosperity.
That's amazing.
In the state resources. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty nice. So, and for me, family of 5 or family of 4, soon to be family of 5.
Yeah.
So next year it'll be a family of 5. If I get a nice little payday in October, I'm not going to complain about it too much. So.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, and it depends. So this year it's $1,700. I think last year it was $1,300.
Okay.
But this is the first year that my family will be able to, get it. So because prior to that, they had moved from South Africa, and you have to have residency here for a year. So, but yeah, I mean, it's an extra. I mean, this year it's going to be an extra like $7,000. So that's nothing bad.
That's a blessing. Oh yeah. Well, hey, that is fantastic. We could go on for way too long. You have lived a very varied and interesting life. True. I appreciate this.
From one pole to the other pole. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm back again.
Yeah. No kidding. Yeah. Go ahead and chill for a minute. Tell us where to find you, what we can find, and what it is you do, because you have both YouTube channel, you've got some stuff on X, so go on for a minute.
Yeah, so my channel is Mr. Patriarch. I kind of I started the channel in 2020, 5 years ago, half a decade, hard to believe. And yeah, I sort of came up sort of through libertarianism. I was always kind of like conservative, just for various reasons, but I was never leftist, but went through libertarianism, and then moving to South Africa was kind of eye-opening in a lot of ways. And prior to that, even I had been reading some rightist literature and was influenced by guys like Paul Gottfried. And yeah, so I set up the channel in 2020, initially covering a lot of meta politics, some history, some theory cell nonsense, and was kind of affiliated with the academic agent sphere, right? So I was a guest on his show a number of times. We're still in contact. So academic agent, AA, as he's affectionately known. And yeah, my production has gone down a bit since moving back to Alaska. So like I said, got the new business going. I'm just more involved with church now, helping out with the Sunday school there, and got a band. So
being a dad takes some time.
Yeah, being a dad takes some time. And so I'm not making as much stuff as I used to. I used to make about 2 pieces of content a week, but I still do post on there. I still do make videos. My most recent video was on different scenarios for the incoming Trump presidency, which was new at that time. And it looks like one of those, it looks like it's a little early to call, but currently it looks like one of those scenarios is the not so great one, the sort of nothing ever happens scenario. But I mean, there's still time for him to prove me wrong, but I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, that's what I do. And then I'm also dink around on X a little bit. So that's me on Twitter. So, Mr. Patriarch, you'll find me.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, you'll find links to that if you jump into the description for this live stream, and you'll be able to reach out to him on that. The only shilling I have for tonight. Did you happen to see on X the new John Carter stream?
I did not know.
Okay, this is quite. I found it interesting. I don't know. I mean, maybe other people won't. Did you ever do a D&D growing up?
No, I played one D&D game with a buddy of mine in Florida, but that was it.
Right. I wanted to play D&D and I never did. There's issue there. Anyways, so this fellow John Carter, he went through and he basically did the D6, the 3D6, figuring out stats and whatever, and he was able to do that within an HBD context. And so he used Grok and he based it on the stats of charisma and wisdom and strength and so on between different people groups. And he went and printed out a whole bunch of things and results because he basically figured out that 3D6 was going to give you pretty close to a statistical bell curve. So nice. It's a lot of fun. I'd go in and dig into that. That's my shilling for this week. It's nerdy, but it looks cool. It's a lot of fun. Oh, it was unbelievable.
But, yeah, and I'm pulling up now so I can check it out later. I'm gonna leave here in a minute and go seal the deal on this truck. But
there you go.
But I know what I'm gonna listen to over there now. Oh, and I don't know if you're planning on it or if anyone listening, but I will be attending the Old Glory Club conference this year in Tennessee. So if anyone wants to say howdy, I'll be there. So
that is an intense trip all the way from Alaska.
Yeah, I've been wanting to go for a while, but once I was finally no longer in financial distress, I was like, you know what? I think I just got to go. So it's going to be good.
There you go. All right, very good. Well, hey, I thank you, and we are going to close out this stream. Have a good evening, gents.
Good night.